So welcome. Obviously, we're huge fans here,
Thank you.
and from your work from, obviously from The Office on. But your film is absolutely beautiful.
Thank you.
And I know we don't have a ton of time with you,
Please,
so I want to.
I don't mind. I've got nothing else to do. I particularly haven't. I'm just in Chicago trying to stay warm.
Yeah.
That's all.
Well, you just came from Sundance too, right?
I came to Sundance, and I appreciate you all coming out because I know the weather is particularly brutal. So thank you for coming to see the film. Although I did come from London and then Sundance, so you barely lifted a finger, frankly. But yes, I'm pleased. Yes, it's very nice to be here. Thank you.
So I want to talk about just kind of how this particular project came to be. It came from a documentary,
yes,
right?
You saw a few clips there at the end.
Right,
yeah.
and so how did it land in your lap?
Well, like all the best things, it came to me via Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, who I did a movie with some years ago called Tooth Fairy. You're welcome.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And he was making one of the Fast and Furious films in London. I believe it was number 14. And he was in a hotel and he couldn't sleep. And the documentary was, there was a rerun of it on British TV. And he saw it, and coming from a wrestling family, he just got really engaged with their story and ended up sort of becoming involved with their life. And that moment in the film where he tells her that she's going to go on for the big match is true. That happened.
True.
And one of the things I had to navigate in the film is, in theory, a documentary team would be following her for part of it, if that makes sense.
Okay,
you know what I mean?
okay.
Because for a brief period there was a documentary team, so I had to cut that bit out because I thought that would be a bit too confusing. But otherwise, it's his involvement is sort of true, and then sort of later still he thought, well, maybe there's a kind of movie, and sent me the documentary via this producer called Kevin Misher, who. And I sat down thinking, well, I'm not interested in wrestling. I've never seen wrestling. I don't know anything about it. But when The Rock tells you to do something, you do it. You don't muck around. And I was just really won over by them and by their love of this thing and the passion they have for it and the way they talk about it, rescuing them from, their darker times in the past, and Ricky being in prison and Julia living on the streets and all that stuff. And as you saw there, mainly violence, as they say, and so, yeah, I wasn't looking for a wrestling project, but just engaged with them and that story despite the wrestling. That seemed irrelevant to me. It was about the dream they had and this family pressure to kind of fulfill it, and the fact that Zach got rejected and she got chosen was just such an emotional moment that in the documentary that was so moving. And I just thought, we've seen a lot of sports movies in which there's sort of celebrations of exceptionalism, which I think there still is because of her success, but there's fewer about what happens to the people when they get left behind, right? When they don't get chosen, what happens then? How do you recalibrate your life and pick yourself up again? And
you really found that in the documentary, because even the documentary itself touches on that, and it touches a lot of, the mother and the parents having to leave, kind of a kid going out on their own and such, but you really mined that story. So how did that process happen?
I went to meet the family, and spoke with Paige, and really the documentary only really covered the first half of the story, because Zach was really hit hard by it. And in the documentary, he kind of covers quite well, and he's sort of, oh, well, I like it here. And actually, he told me subsequently, really, he had a mini breakdown. I mean, it really was incredibly hard for him. And Paige told me about the loneliness of being away and not having that support structure, and she would phone her dad and say, I want to come home, and he'd go, you're not coming back, and so it was really tough for her, and it took Zach a long time to sort of come out of the hole and realise the value of what he had back home, and the training school where I went to see him at the training school, and the kids worship him. I mean, they just idolise him, and the blind kid had moved on when I
But that's
left,
true too.
But that's true as well. And he developed this whole teaching method where he'd spent months with the kid just pacing out the ring, so he understood the dimensions of the ring, and then he had these kind of stamping techniques to sort of signal when to do certain moves. So, I mean, and he developed all that. It wasn't like there's a wrestling handbook for blind people, So I just have nothing but admiration for him,
And that process for you then, how long? So you get this in your lap, right? And you see, and you find an emotional connection to it. And so then how long does it take you to develop really the story you want to tell about this family?
Well, it occurred to me that there's a number of versions of this film, right? There's the bleak kind of Aronofsky wrestler version, gritty and low budget and incredibly real and raw and tough to watch. And then there's the potential sort of meta version, right, where you use the lies and levels of reality of wrestling to somehow comment on something.
That wasn't what
which I didn't, and I thought, well, what am I commenting on? I am not. The version that I felt kind of engaged with, which was sort of trying to keep it authentic, but make a kind of Rocky style underdog story. You know, I love those kind of movies, and it just seemed like it was sort of. It's very rare that you get a true life story that has that shape to it. You know, without having to do too much manipulation. And so, once I'd settled on that, it became a question of. As I say, meeting the family, speaking a lot with them, going back to them, asking more questions. They were quite guarded initially. They didn't really want to give me everything, but over time, I think I won their trust and they opened up. And I didn't want to sugarcoat the fact that, you know, there has been jail time and one of their brothers was in prison. But at the same time, you know, I always knew that it would end with the big fight. And she told me, which I was really moved by, which she said, when that happened, yes, the fight is predetermined and there's a lot of artifice to it, but for her, it was like winning the heavyweight championship of the world. I mean, the emotion that she felt in that moment was as real as any real sporting triumph, because she had been through so much, and I just thought that seemed like a really beautiful thing to kind of celebrate. You know?
And I'm assuming the family didn't know going to win, or was it even though it was predetermined? You don't know.
No, they were watching it from different places, because I think the mother actually was somewhere else at the time, geographically, because she was off performing. So they weren't actually all together, although the rest of them were. But yes, they didn't know, and they just were swept along by the thrill of it as well. And The Rock had told her, you know, the day before that she was going to go out. And in fact, he'd actually told her she was going to win. And we actually shot a version where The Rock tells her she's going to win. Because I thought, like, could I make this work where you know she's going to win and I still make you cry? But it turns out I can't make you cry if you already know. You need to find out when she finds out.
Yeah, and there's another version too of like the whole sensationalism of, if you stayed along those lines, of just this over, you know, Hollywood kind of thing. But you didn't. You made a really heartfelt, family, you know, emotional, independent film.
It began with Film 4 in the UK. It wasn't. Dwayne went to lots of studios and couldn't get it made, and developed, and so we developed it with Film 4, you know, who are very much independent cinema in England. They did The Favourite and Room and you know, lots of these movies. And so and then in order to get the rights to Paige's story, we had to go to the WWE, and so you end up with this very unlikely partnership, production partnership between Film 4, who made 3 Billboards, and WWE, who made some films in which John Cena comes back from the Iraq War and becomes a vigilante, and it's like, it was the weirdest set of, you know, with very different opinions on the script, as you'd imagine.
And so you have all these entities in it, and so you, as a director, get the final say in the process, or is it more like you have to balance this? The family's involved too. What is that balancing
well, the
process?
family, I never let them have any editorial say, because I just didn't want it to just simply be, I believe the word is a hagiography, you know, where I simply blow smoke up their ass. And I wanted to explore the time. I mean, in the original script, Zach's depression was even more bleak than it is. I mean, it was very tough for him, but there's only so much moping that people could tolerate. But and there was actually probably more bad language in the original script, and that was one of the only real things they decided, or I think someone decided that it shouldn't be quite as rude as the original script, because the family are they curse a lot, is the truth. So aside from that, though, I didn't really change it too much, and I didn't have a lot of interview. The struggle was in kind of budgetary stuff and the sheer difficulty of getting it made, because it was pretty low budget.
But you shot, parts of it shot at the actual...
Yes, well, that was the one benefit of having the WWE, obviously, was that not just the one benefit, but that was our benefit, was them allowing us 1 hour. How nice of them. 1 hour after a Monday Night Raw telecast at the Staples Center in LA, and they gave us 1 hour. Why we only got 1 hour, I don't know. So, but...
to shoot that final scene?
So we shot that final scene, and we had 20,000 people stay behind, and I mean, we told them, we didn't just lock the doors, and The Rock came down to MC it, kind of be the first AD, and The problem is, if you've never seen The Rock in front of a live crowd, it's insane. I mean, it's like Elvis has come back. You know, it's wild. And I said to him, please don't get carried away, because you need to get out there, explain what we're doing.
1 hour.
Boom, 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 boom. Let's bring out the actors. He does 20 minutes on the mic. He's out there, he's making phone calls, ad-libbing, doing, oh, can you smell? I'm like, Jesus Christ. And I'm the only person who's ever been screaming at The Rock to get out of the wrestling ring. But eventually he was amazing, and he managed to he got them to do the cheers when we wanted, and the boos and the shouting her name and all that stuff. And then Florence, the lead actress, came out. They played Paige's music, and she walked out in the outfit and just recreated that match. And I mean, I was so nervous for her, and she wouldn't let me get near her beforehand because I was making her nervous. Whereas she just was ice cold. She just had nerves of steel. Went out there. We did about 4 passes of it, some with her, some with the stunt people. And then that was it. They threw us out. And and of course I didn't know, because we had 3 of our own cameras, and then there's about 10 or 12 WWE cameras. But obviously I can't possibly direct those cameras, so I'm just hoping they get what we need, you know what I mean? And we didn't have any chance there was no reshoots. So it was crazy. It was one of the most stressful days of my life.
So as far as as a director, this is your second feature?
That's right.
Right, okay. So what's, as far as these are mostly you have out here a lot of filmmakers, young filmmakers, right? So what is your advice for directors, for writers, the process of finding the material you want to do, working with actors? Like, what kinds of things can you talk to them about in the process? I mean, casting was huge. Your casting was so dead on.
Yes.
You see the documentary to what the cast was right there. They were exactly who you would have put in those roles.
Well,
right?
that's if you're doing that kind of narrative fiction in that way, then the casting director is I mean, everyone around you is important, but the casting director was essential here, because I mean, I ended up seeing about 60 young actresses to play that part, because it was incredibly difficult to cast, because you needed someone who could carry the movie, had the acting chops, had the charisma that you'd believe they were a wrestling star, was willing to do the wrestling. Met a lot of people. Florence came in, and I'd seen her in this movie called Lady Macbeth, where she's much more contained and controlled, and so couldn't really see her in this role. Made her run the lines many times. Had her come back with Jack, who plays her brother, and just to convince myself that she could do it. But again, my casting director Shaheen, I think again, if you cast your own crew around you well, you need to trust them. That she kept saying to me, "I'm telling you, this girl can do it," and she was right. And so, so that was vital, and similarly with all the rest of the cast. And the biggest learning curve for me is that I studied film at university, and I think there's a danger that sometimes you imagine that you've got time to plan and compose every frame, and you'll have years of pre-production in which you can kind of fine-tune the costumes and the sets. We had 5 weeks prep on this movie, which is not enough. We were shooting on 2 sides of the Atlantic. So I was prepping in London, and I had to fly to LA to shoot the Staples Center and the stuff with The Rock. I hadn't seen half the sets before I landed. I mean, I was choosing out of photographs. And so I think one of the things you have to sort of arm yourself with is that you have to roll with the punches, because unless you're doing a very, very low budget thing in one room where you really can control the environment, or you have an endless budget, you very rarely do you get all the kind of planning and rehearsal time and everything that you would ideally want. And I remember there's a quote, I think it's Kurosawa, who says, he's asked in one of his historical epics why he framed a frame in a particular way. And he says, well, if you pan to the left 5 inches, there's a parking lot. And if you pan to the right, 5 inches, there's a tower block. And that's so often the way, I think, with filming, is that so many of the creative choices become what can you do in that moment, right? And so, like when the girls are on the roof, because I didn't have any time to scout, I had 2 choices. One, it was on the roof and it looked really good, but there was a construction site next door, so you couldn't hear anything. Or I had one other option which didn't look as good, but it was silent. And I ended up going with the construction site, and so we had to ADR all the dialogue, because the roof was too noisy, right? And so, you have endless situations like that where the alleyway in which they have their kind of head-to-head argument, the brother and sister, that was backing onto a row of shops, one of which was a fish and chip shop, and they would not shut off their ventilation system, which was just pummeling out kind of fish and chip fumes and just this noise, this kind of relentless noise. And we said, we'll give you money, please switch off. And they were like, we aren't shutting this shop until we've sold every fish and every chip. So we just had to start buying fish and chips from this place. We bought so many. We were giving them to homeless people and like just random strangers, because he didn't run the shop, so he's like, I can't close it. I just got to sell the fish and chips. So we just had to keep buying fish and chips until they ran out, and then they would close the store. And so there's production situations like that, you know what I mean? You're not foreseeing them ahead of time. But I think again, if you're surrounded with a good team, if you've cast well, you have a good DP, you have a good first, you can kind of ride through those storms, but it's not easy.
Is this the same DP you've worked with before?
This was the DP I'd worked with previously on my previous cinema movie, which I did with Ricky, and he's very experienced, and he's great. But even then, he and I are kind of, we get on very well, and he's very easygoing. But there's times where the stress is on, and you're snapping at each other, and it's just really, really tough. I heard someone else describe directing as it's like you're being chased down a hill by a boulder and you're just trying to outrun it before it crushes you. And that is much of the time how it feels.
And how about on the other side of it as the writer, right? I mean, that's so much more of an isolated thing you're going through. And so we talked a lot about like you talking with these people, but how do you just approach the craft of writing? Obviously, you've created brilliant things your whole career, right?
Well, this was the first thing I'd written of substance on my own, without collaborators, whether it was Ricky Gervais or other people that I've worked with. And when you collaborate, you exclude things much quicker, right? So you make decisions about what you're not going to do much quicker because you have this kind of this dialectic, right? And it's sort of yes, no, and you argue and then you resolve questions. Whereas when you're on your own, you look at that blank screen and every possible avenue is open to you. And even with a story like this, which had its kind of foundation blocks because of the true story, you still have to make these constant decisions about where you emphasize things, what you think is needed structurally, or for instance, in this case, I needed to do a lot of lay a lot of just to explain to non-wrestling fans what you needed to know about wrestling, right? So you needed to know that part of the victory of wrestling is winning over the crowd. They call it going over. And so I have to bed in that you need to win over the audience in order to pay off at the end when she does. And lots of things like that. So there's a lot of kind of underwiring in this film that hopefully I've disguised fairly well.
In the physical side of it too, like there's so many people think it's just fake, right? And you're like he's picking things out of his back, right?
So it's a lot of choice about what to include and what to exclude. And for instance, Zach had loads of lovely stories about how he met his wife and these lovely romantic stories that I just thought were really charming, like he was trying to impress her, and then the parents and the sister put a load of kind of like that, that sort of muscle rub that you do if you're a sports person, which kind of heats up. They kind of smeared his underwear with that, and then he was going on a date with her, and he put that on straight after a wrestling match, and he went out to meet her, and then his underwear started to heat up, and he had to run off, and it's just like such a lovely scene, but I couldn't fit it in, and so so a lot of the writing process was that. A lot of it was editing as you go, I suppose, as much as it's what you exclude as much as what you include.
And we talk a lot about that in the classes of the story you're trying to tell, and all these other things that are wonderful, but they just don't tell your story.
That's it, and I think that the kill your babies idea is one I really cling to. I think that's vital. And yet, even then, I mean, I think there's something about screenwriting that you're writing often for producers and executives who are readers, but they're not. They actually struggle to visualize it, and so you end up overwriting in the script in an effort because they every emotional beat spelled out because they're reading it, and we know that in actual fact when someone like Florence, who's a terrific actress, is on screen and you see her curled up in the corner of a room and that vulnerability, she just exudes that. But you end up having to sort of laboriously type that out, and almost always like they want a line which is, I feel so nervous, and because a lot of executives and people who speed reading 100 scripts a week, they just need it spelled out in that way. And so I've realised over time, you write one script, and what you shoot is actually, you always know, is going to be something else, right? But even then, saying that, there's so many things where I thought I would absolutely need stuff which we shot. The first cut of this movie was like 2.5 hours long, and then you just realise as you get into the editing room how little, how much you don't need, how much the audience picks up, how much they're ahead of you, and that actually half the words you've written.
And that's kind of the demise of a film, right? If the audience gets ahead of you, right?
Right.
I mean, this is obviously really, really tight.
Well, it is, and although I think you know where it's heading, I like, for instance, there was a lot of discussion for a while about, like, do I have a sports montage? Do I have the moment where she trains, and because everyone's seen it in a sports movie, do you need another one? And the simple truth is, you miss it when it's not there. You want it. You want the moment where she comes back and a song plays and she pushes weights. You want it, and I don't care. However, I don't care who you are and how much you're a snob of movies. You want that scene, because I tell you, when it's not there, you miss it. And
you try it without it.
Oh yeah, it didn't. And we try, and it's like, damn it. And so there's certain conventions that people want, whether they like it or not, whether they even realise or not. But it's can you just disguise it enough? Can you just preempt them smelling it coming just for a moment before it comes?
And so how about next? Like, if you've done stand-up, I mean, you were obviously started out with all, we were talking earlier, your undergrad or your college was film, and then you fell into meeting Ricky, and then you went to the BBC and created, the CD Boss, right? Or the Boss.
That's right.
Which became The Office. But then after The Office, you've done extras, you've done your stand-up, you've done films now. I mean, what are you itching to do? Well, I'd love to do another film, and I'd like to do also more drama. I've always been a fan of drama, and I actually watch more drama than comedy. I recently made a list of my favourite 500 movies, because, I'm a film nerd and I've got time on my hands. And it's such an eclectic list, and it has everything from, Michelangelo Antonioni films, and then it has, The Predator, and it's a really varied list. And I'd be proud to be associated with any of them. And my taste is very varied in that way. And so, I'd love to try and do something that kind of is a left turn or a right turn next that is unexpected, or is maybe a genre thing, or a art movie. I don't know. I sort of feel like. But not necessarily comedy, go back to that
at all? Not necessarily, no. I mean, I think there's always going to be humour, because I think even a lot of the best drama has humour. One of the ones I always go back to is that episode of The Sopranos where Paulie and Christopher get lost in the woods, in the snowy wastelands, trying to bump off this guy. And it's hilarious, and Paulie's trying to, he's got no shoes and he's freezing, and they're also trying to kill someone. And I just think that's such a great of how you can have humour and drama walk hand in hand, and so I often use that as a template of things. But I guess in the way that this originated with The Rock seeing a documentary, I just need a major movie star to send me an idea.
In your lap. But then following your trajectory, kind of finding that thing within you, like even going way back when you were a film student and such, and following, like, what made you decide, when you were at the BBC, other people were doing documentaries, right? You were supposed to go out to do it. What made you decide to go, like, this is the path that I want to take with this particular project? Well,
I was very single-minded from a young age. I was a film and TV fan from a young age. As well, we used to watch a lot of stuff endlessly. I was a big fan of John Cleese and Monty Python, and later in life, when I was in my early teens, I began to become aware of the idea of the director and the writer behind it, and people like Billy Wilder and Woody Allen and people, and so then I became sort of something of the historian of film. Like, I would read all the books about it, and so I became more and more aware about the mechanics of it, and that a lot of people I admired, like John Cleese, wrote and performed, and then I remember I used to write film reviews for a magazine in my hometown, and I was very junior, and they would send me to see films which the senior critics didn't want to see. And one of them was Swingers with Vince Vaughn. And no one knew who he was at the time, and he came on the screen, and I was just so blown away by that film. And it felt so, even though I was from Bristol and they were from LA, I don't know, it felt like it could have been my friends, and that was really inspirational to me. That was a moment where I thought, I want to be on the other side of the camera. I'd like to have my name at the end rather than just be writing the reviews of it. So the fact that Vince is in this is a huge.
Had you worked with him before?
No, and I mean, I told him immediately when I met him.
Right.
You know, I was like the fanboy,
right.
you know,
right.
raving about swingers.
So how do you, and also in that instance, like, obviously he's a really seasoned actor too. You as the director, you know, how much time do you spend with him in rehearsals and directing, or is it one of those things where it's Vince Vaughn and you let him do his thing? I mean, how much is...
Well, I was lucky because, you know, Vince, you know, has got very strong ideas, but he and I think, were generally on the same page with this, which was lucky. And so he was actually incredibly constructive with the script and in terms of notes, not just for his scenes, but for other scenes. He was really, he's very good with some of those, you know, those books about myths and stuff. So he's very good at kind of, you know, analysing the scenes and then obviously you can let him just improvise and he can ad-lib hilarious stuff. So in that regard, he's brilliant. But over time, and actually the more I've acted, the more I trust the actors to tell me when something's not working or something's amiss. And sometimes, however much you've written and rewritten the script and you've had it read by friends and producers and everyone, the actors will tell you when something's not working, or they'll solve the problem for you. There was an example, I did this movie Logan, and I was playing this albino mutant, typecasting, that my only superpower is that I can sense when other mutants are in the area. And then we come to shoot this scene in which this little girl who's a mutant is hiding in the back of Wolverine's limo. And in the script, Wolverine's like, something's not right. And he kind of opens the trunk and she's in there. And he's like, ah. And I'm like, guys, I don't want to be a diva here, but my only superpower is that I can smell when other mutants are in the area. Don't we need to bed this in? Because it's going to become relevant. Here I get kidnapped and they use me to track down mutants. I was like, isn't this a good opportunity to set this up? They're like, oh yeah. And Jim Mangold, you know, was Oscar nominated for that script. He should have shared that nomination with me. But, you know, tons of producers, executives, there'd been read-throughs, no one had spotted this. And suddenly you're in that moment and you're only thinking from the eyes of your character. You're like, something doesn't seem right here. And so I really trust actors to sort of solve those problems. And I think, you know, every actor works differently. Some are more needy than others. Some peak at different times, right? That's something you have to learn. You have to get the rhythm of an actor in the first few days of filming, because some are perfect in their fifth take and some are great off the bat, and then they kind of, they are not so good afterwards. So you have to start to kind of sense when people are at their best and kind of and cover them appropriately, you know, and so
when you said some are more needy too, just needing like feedback from you, just
need feedback or reassurance. I'm very bad at remembering to thank them and congratulate them and say they did great work. I always think if I haven't said you're terrible, then that you should assume you were great. But as an actor myself, I know that I'm not I wouldn't say a terribly needy person, but you do need at the end of the day the well done, good work, because otherwise you just don't know. You just go back to your dressing room like, what the hell? And so it's important that you compliment them and you reassure them, and sometimes they act like, but you know secretly they needed it. So that's important. And, you know, but the problem is now in movies you just don't get time to rehearse. I mean, we had maybe 3 days rehearsal, aside from the wrestling rehearsals, and you know, I mean, if you see a film like A Dog Day Afternoon, Sidney Lumet had like 3 weeks to rehearse that like a play. I mean, they went to that set, they had blocked every camera move and that was rehearsed like a play. I mean, you're lucky if you get to meet the actor before they come on set, you know. So that's another pressure and that's another thing, and you sort of end up rehearsing and working stuff out on the fly.
Well, in a good way. I mean, our students often don't get that. So you always think in larger productions you're going to get that time, and you don't either. No. Well, I have to go to Q&A now.
Of course.
So if there's anybody out there who's to line up that's ready.
Hi, I was curious about how you decided to choose where to end the movie, because obviously Paige's life is like... I was curious about your choice of where to end the movie.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Because obviously Paige's life is ongoing. Was it hard to like choose, all right, like this is it?
Well, at the moment at which we started it, the sort of biggest moment of her life had been that big win, that first appearance at Raw and winning. we began the process. I mean, the film started about 3.5 years ago, and so that was sort of it seemed like a natural conclusion. At the time, she was still high up in the roster, and then she got injured, and then various other, problems which you may have read about kind of occurred. And so there is a sequel really of all the other things that happened. But the problem is that the train is on the tracks by that point, right? And so we sort of decided to kind of, as you say, her life was ongoing, but we sort of decided that it was this snapshot of her of a moment in time for her life, and and subsequently she got very injured, and so all sorts of things have occurred in the interim. But it just seemed like such a natural ending for the film. But yes, as I say, in the Aronofsky version, it would have been a much bleaker, darker thing, and we would have ended it differently, probably.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's one of the things when you're doing a true story, obviously, is that the lives continue while you're still making the film.
Hi.
Hello.
My question was, what is the biggest difference between directing something like this than directing something like Hello Ladies, other than the fact that you're acting more in Hello Ladies than you are in this?
Well, bizarrely, even though it was TV, HBO we just had a lot more time. It was just a lot more luxurious. We had a lot more prep time and writing time, rehearsing time, and we just, HBO has enough money to just, not to indulge you, but to let you have the time and schedule that you'd hope. And actually, in most of the TV I've done, that's been the case on the whole. I've had the breathing space to do stuff, whereas in movies, for whatever reason, you just don't tend to have that as much time. I mean, maybe you do if you're making, Aquaman, but in my experience, I don't know why. I think it's partly because it's hard to raise the money for a film, and basically the moment which you start hiring your staff and your heads of department is the moment they have to start shelling out money, right? So they want the moment from when you hire that first person to when you start shooting to be as compressed as possible, because they've got to pay people that whole time. Whereas I think TV, you just, it's often an ongoing thing. The staff is up and running. You're still writing as you're shooting. They can spread the costs a little bit more, and so that was a big difference. But I think the fundamentals of directing are the same. I mean, particularly now in TV, where people expect a certain cinematic quality. I mean, you use a lot of the same equipment, a lot of the same cameras, so the mechanics of it are different. I think the big difference is time, and also telling a story in 90 minutes is I assumed it would be a lot easier than it is, but actually the economy that you need is unlike TV, where you have a lot longer to kind of slowly unfold the premise and the characters, and you can let a romance, like in The Office, simmer for years until people are infuriated by it. Within a movie, you've got to get going. And it's amazing when you show it to I'm sure if you've done it, you'll know, you show it to an audience and you can sense when what you thought was the funniest or most entertaining scene in the world is not quite moving the narrative on, and so people feel a little itchy, and they start to get kind of restless, and so that's something that's different, certainly.
Thank you.
Hello, my name's Emily. I just want to say I'm a huge fan of both your stand-up and also Tooth Fairy. So
there you go. What a day for you this is.
Yeah. So my question was this your first time directing fight choreography? And also, how did that affect like your production budget and also like the time to actually shoot and rehearse?
Well, yes, it was the first time I'd done action stuff. I did a few stunts in Hello Ladies, which I executed myself. I'm very much the Tom Cruise of comedy. But yes, it was. And again, because everything was compressed, we actually had to send Florence and Jack off to the real NXT in Florida to train, so they were busy training. We were choreographing the fights with a stuntman and a wrestling person, and they were the stunt coordinator was terrific, and he would do a lot of previs and kind of film the fights, and then I would make suggestions. And actually, then Dwayne made great suggestions, because I didn't realize that wrestling matches have their own 3-act structure, which I didn't realize, but which, you know, the good guy, the baby face as they call him, has to sort of basically keep taking punches until they're down on the mat. It seems like victory's impossible. And then they have to rise up at the last minute, which we hadn't done in our fights. We were just doing stuff that seemed cool. It's like, throw in a backflip. Whereas Dwayne's like, well, why are they doing a backflip? Like, this is King Lear now? But again, you know, with so little prep time, you can't be precious with the fight, so you just end up having to. I mean, a lot of it was very guerrilla shooting, and it was just, you know, handheld. We obviously had to go handheld because we didn't have time to plan and map everything out with, you know, tracking shots and things, and so we just had to kind of go on the hoof, and it really was. And again, it's that thing of, you know, you can have storyboards and you can have, and it's like, oh, fuck it, right, just, you know, you just have to go because the clock's ticking and people are looking at you, and you're going to lose the actors or the location or whatever. So it was, and like I say, that final fight, it was just, I learned something from that movie, The Fighter, because The Fighter was low budget, and one of the things that he cleverly did there was he used HBO's actual boxing cameramen to film the boxing fights. Because he knew that they were so used to covering a boxing match. And so we did the same thing. That's why we, you know, by using the WWE people who regularly film stuff, they kind of almost know where to be. And also to disguise the fakery of wrestling, which was great. So so thank you to The Fighter for that. Cool. Yeah, there we are.
Thank you.
Hi. You've already spoken a bit about this, but this was a story that was based in true life. It was already a documentary you made about it. And I just want to ask, personally, did you find any fears or intimidation at the end of the day taking this true story and adapting it into, at the end of the day, your own narrative context, whether it be from yourself, the producers, or even people involved with the real story?
Well, a lot of my concerns were people saying, you know, I think if you've done film studies or if you've done film criticism yourself, you slightly know where the knives are going to come out, you know, to attack you. You can sense it coming down the pipe. So it's like, for instance, I could have done a version of this in which I paint a much bleaker version of the WWE, right? And I talk about the way that, you know, certainly for many years, and actually Paige was a pioneer in this, in changing the way they treat women in wrestling. And some of that was in the early drafts of the script. But the problem was, if I start to tear down WWE, then why is she doing this? Like, you know, what is this thing she's pursuing? It becomes a much more complicated idea about, you know, success. And I don't know, it opens up a whole other conversation. Or, you know, you know, like I say, do I give you the movie moments? Do I give you the montage, and do I give you the slow-mo final thing, you know, or do I do it rough? And so in the end, I think a lot of it becomes, well, I can see where I might get criticized, but screw it, you know, this is what I want to see. This is the version I think would be fun and enjoyable, and, you know, if I can make you choke up a bit at the end and get emotional, as I did when I was film reviewing and I went to see Bridges of Madison County with Meryl Streep and Clint Eastwood, and I remember watching it at this preview with these other critics, and by the end I was really emotional, and they were already kind of hard drinking and cynical. I didn't want them to see me crying, so I just let the entire credits roll as they go to the bar. Like, coming to the bar? No, I'm just going to see who the best boy is. I just better check that. See you out there. But I find that there used to be this idea of films as tearjerkers, right? Now, kind of like Betty Davis movies would be tearjerkers, and they used to say it pejoratively, like it's just a tearjerker. I'm like, do you know how hard it is to jerk tears from someone, like in 90 minutes? That's really tough. So, and I loved that. I cried at Moneyball, for God's sake. So, so that was one of my ambitions. I really thought, I was very choked up by the documentary and by their real story, and I thought if I can get you a little teary-eyed by the end, then something's working.
And both airplane things do. Like the documentary and yours.
Good. Yes.
One more question, last
Thank you.
question.
Hello. Many of your previous work, whether it's Hello Ladies, Cemetery Junction, they all have this element of sort of an autobiographical element or element of biography. And in your conversation with Anna, you kind of mentioned that the story of the family was kind of your through line to finding your way into this story, into something you might not otherwise be interested in. So with regards to future work or to this work in particular, do you feel like that is sort of the essential element that you need to have before you take on a project, is finding that biographical element? Do you see that continuing in your future work?
I think so, in the sense that I like to be moved. The movies I enjoy the most, or most things, are things which I have an emotional involvement with. I'm not a big fan of the meta movie or the meta comedy. The idea of sort of commenting on film itself and sort of just seems pointless to me. Like, it just feels very masturbatory and kind of. And there are many people that do it brilliantly, and Tarantino, for instance, is a master at it. But I can admire his movies, but I'm not moved by them. I don't find an emotional involvement with them. Whereas I feel like my favourite movie of last year was a movie called Leave No Trace, which is like a low-budget movie just about, I don't know if you saw it, but about just, it was directed by the woman that did Winter's Bone, that was the kind of Jennifer Lawrence breakout. And it's just this father and daughter living in the woods and him trying to kind of keep hold of her and not lose her to the authorities. I just thought it was a really beautiful, small, very emotional, very raw film, 2 excellent performances, and it's just a beautifully made film. Don't see it mentioned in the Oscars, don't see it kind of getting a lot of praise, because it doesn't make a big splash. It's not a grandstanding kind of film. It doesn't show off, And so that's how those are the films and projects that I'm attracted to, the things which I find emotional in different ways. And even with, going back to The Office, I always was important to me there was a love story at the core of it, and that by the end, you were sort of, even for this absurd boss, that you kind of cared for him and that you kind of understood who he was. And in this case, I come from a working class family, and I had obviously aspirations to do something in entertainment, much like Paige does. And so even though I didn't know anything about wrestling, I just responded to them and the family. And so, yeah, I think it is something that I would search for. Or I'll just do the next Aquaman, one of the two.
Do both.
Yeah, exactly, do both.
Well, we have to call it a day.
Okay.
But thank you so much for coming, and that was awesome. And
Thank you.
thanks for taking your time with us.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you.